All right, so Mr. Blake Dursteler is actually a Utah State graduate. He graduated with his bachelor's and master's in accounting in '96 and '98. And he was heavily involved while he was here when he was doing his undergraduate studies. He worked with Partners in Business, Shingo Prize, some of the same things that we're involved with, a lot of us here. And he was also elected student body senator for the Huntsman School of Business. And as well, a member of the city council in Hyde Park City. So not only involved here directly with the USU community, but also abroad in Hyde Park. So after his graduation, he worked for a few different accounting firms, and then went on to be a partner and a founder of an additional accounting firm. He's been very successful in his career overall. Currently, he's the director and board member of the C.L. Fred Leora May Evans Family Charitable Foundation, and is also a member of the Huntsman School of Business National Advisory Board. He's been a key player in pushing forward the SEED program and has been heavily involved. Many of you have been on the SEED trips with him as well. So we're grateful to have him with us today, and we're excited to hear about him and his career and to learn from him today. So please welcome Mr. Blake Dursteler.
Good evening. Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation. And it's not a long drive for me from North Logan up here, so I left about 20 minutes ago, and maybe some of you did too. I have lived in Logan since I was 12, with the exception of 4 years, so my career path is probably a little bit different than most that you'll hear, in the sense that I actually moved to Logan when I was 12 or 13 years old, and I only left for 4 years, and I came back. So that may be a little different than most people that come up here. But I'll talk a little bit about my background, tell you some of the things that I've done, some of the things I've learned, some of the things I believe and think, and then we'll talk about whether I'm right or wrong after that. And if you guys have questions along the way, feel free to ask them anytime, okay? So like I said, I moved to Logan when I was 12 years old, and I had lived in 2 or 3 foreign countries and something like 8 or 9 states. My dad was in the military. And from this area, they decided they wanted to move back. And I remember telling my parents that I was willing to move to Logan if they would only stay for 2.5 years. Because after 2.5 years, I was going to move. Because in the military, that's about every 2.5, 3 years we moved. And so when I was 16, my dad came and he said, "Hey, I'm going to retire from the military and we're staying here." And I was really upset. I was not happy. And but as I went to high school and then I went to college here, and now that I live here and I have family and my own children here, we love Cache Valley. And I made a conscientious decision to come back to Cache Valley. So for the 2 years that 2.5, 3 years that I left, I worked for 2 different firms. I worked for Intermountain Healthcare as a senior analyst, and then I was a senior manager at a CPA firm in Utah County. And then I moved back to Logan, and we opened a CPA firm that had offices here in Salt Lake and in Utah County. And I sold that business off. In the mid-2000s, my partners in Utah County and Salt Lake took the business down there, and I sold the accounting firm here to a local firm and got out of accounting and have never looked back. When I was a student, I was bound and determined to be in finance. And my senior trip, I went with my father, and we went to Wall Street, and I spent a week with a firm called Goldman Sachs, and a bond trader there who did bond work for my dad's firm. And I was convinced that that's the route I wanted to go. And in fact, after I graduated, I did interview with a couple of Wall Street firms and didn't end up going that way. And I don't regret that decision either. So that may sound odd, but I think the important thing that I learned is that I wanted to fit in where I felt most comfortable in terms of my abilities and my goals. And I felt extremely comfortable in that environment, but it wasn't aligned per se with the desires that I had for some of my ambitions about running my own business. So went to work locally for a number of years here, and then went out on my own about 15 years ago. And in school, I remember thinking that I wanted to be in business. I started in business. I have a dual degree in finance and accounting and a master's degree in accounting. And I listened to my father who said, you need to understand accounting. And a good friend of mine and a mentor that also was here from Logan, a guy who used to own the cable company, Jonathan Bolin, told me that he wasn't an engineer, but he knew when the engineers were BSing him because he knew enough about the technology. And it's the same with accounting. You want to know enough about the numbers and understand what's going on, so when somebody's trying to tell you what's going on a balance sheet or income statement, you can tell whether they're lying to you or not, right? And believe it or not, that sometimes happens. And so I stayed in accounting, and I'll never regret that decision. Like I said, I got a dual degree in finance as well, which is, I think, what I really love. So I've been fortunate enough to come back and teach a class or two here at the university. Some of you may have had me, and hopefully the rest of you will be in a class of mine. And I have probably, my methodology is a little bit different because it's pretty much like working with me, and that is I'm going to give you enough information for you to go out and figure it out on your own, or not figure it out, right? And if you figure it out, then you'll succeed. If you don't, then it's not going to work out very good. And that is probably the biggest piece of advice that I have, or the biggest kernel of truth I think that I've learned throughout my professional career. And it's just like they say here in the Huntsman School, you need to own your education. You need to own your own employment, your own job, your own responsibilities. The number one thing that I just really grates me the wrong way is when someone says, well, that's not my job or that's not my responsibility. I can tell at that point that I'm not a very good manager, because if I hear that from someone that works for me or works with me, it's clear that they don't understand how we operate, and the understanding that they are affiliated and everything they do touches everyone else. So it is their responsibility. And you will get, in my opinion, out of your education and out of your employment and out of everything you do, exactly what you expect and what you put into it. So if you have a high expectation, I think you'll have a high return in terms of your experience and opportunity here. And most of you, if not all of you, have high expectations because you're leaders here at the College of Business. And that's a good sign. You aren't required to do that. It's not part of your curriculum. It's not something that somebody made you do. It's something that you did on your own, and you're to be commended for that because it demonstrates your willingness to take on additional work. Maybe not just because you love it, but because you're interested in it or you want to learn about it. And that is the second thing I think I've learned throughout my professional career, and that is a desire to continue to understand and learn. I remember, and I've shared this story with a number of people, a number of students, but when I got my master's degree in accounting, the first thing I did is go out and get a job at a CPA firm. And the first day I was there, they asked me to do a quarterly income tax return, a 941. And I had no idea what a 941 was. And yet I had a master's degree in accounting, right? So be prepared to learn things that you didn't learn in school. What you're going to be able to apply, though, are the skills that you learned in school. The things, the process and the manner of analyzing a problem and solving that. And working with a group, working with an instructor, working with team members to allow you to make that, to learn those things that you're going to be confronted with as you go out into the workplace. It's like learning a second language, right? Many of you have learned a second language here at school, and many of you have gone overseas. And when you go to a country where you think you speak their language and you get off the plane and you realize that you don't have any clue what language they're speaking, right? You think you've gone to the wrong place. It's the same, in my experience, as you leave school and you go into the workplace. A lot of the concepts that you have spent a lot of time on may be something that you don't use for a long time in your professional career. At some point you may, and at some point you may not. But the skill set that you acquired in learning those principles, the diligence that you had to put forth in mastering those particular principles and concepts in each class that you take every semester are what you will use in the business place. So share a couple bit things about some of the companies that I worked for. In Intermountain Healthcare, I worked as a senior analyst, and I analyzed all capital acquisitions in excess of $2.5 million. So if there's anything that was going to be purchased in the company that cost more than $2.5 million, I had to make an analysis of that. And we bought a lot of stuff, ironically, that cost over $2.5 million. In the hospital business, a lot of stuff costs more than that. And I presented to the board frequently, and that was a good experience in and of itself. But what I remember the first time that I presented to my senior manager, and he said, "That's really good. I want you to come into the board meeting, and I want you to present that." We were buying some helicopters, the life flight helicopters that you see around. They were similar to that. And I remember specifically my recommendation was that we should not buy this particular type of helicopter. And I remember them saying, "Oh, that's good, great, you did a great job." And like the next week, we bought that specific helicopter. And I thought, what's going on here, man? You guys are paying me to tell you what to do, and I told you not to buy that. So that's the other thing I learned when I went out into the real world, and that is that I'm not always right. In fact, I'm probably wrong more often than I am right. And being able to work with people and process different opinions and different attitudes and different experiences is critical to our ability to work in any work environment, because so many of us come from a different background and we have different mindset, and we have different skills, and we have different expectations. And so you're not always going to be right. I found out I wasn't always right. And it was interesting because I started to think I was always getting it wrong, because about 80% of the time when I'd tell them not to buy something, they'd end up buying it. But I think I also learned that I was being relatively myopic, in the sense that I was really looking at the tree and not the forest in terms of how they manage their business. And so in terms of maybe a net present value or discounted cash flow or something like that I may have been analyzing a particular purchase on, the variables that weren't coming into play were some of the subjective factors about the overall benefit to the business that acquisition may mean. Occasionally I was right. Once we bought a practice for 7 times earnings, and 3 years later we wrote it off. So don't ever pay 7 times earnings for something, is what I learned there. And then I went into the accounting world, and I spent a lot of time doing tax returns, which is not something that I can say that I love. But I spent 10 years doing that. And it was a doorway for me to understand some very complex transactions. Very similar to the nuts and bolts of finance and accounting that you're learning in your classes, the process of preparing tax returns exposes you to a lot of different venues and avenues of how business operates, legal structures and formats, and all of the background that you may not get in a class about how do you actually form a corporation, and how do you operate that corporation, how do you staff and insure and protect that corporation. And that's really where I spent most of my years in accounting, was in management consulting for high net worth individuals and businesses, as well as international and multinational corporations. Ironically, many of whom started or were centered here in the Intermountain West. And so when I made my move into real estate, which is where I arguably made most of my money and lost most of my money, it was very important to me, because we were at the time forming maybe, we would say, 1 company a day. And think about trying to come up with just a name for a company a day. And we were coming up with some pretty weird names, like OMAT LLC, one more asinine thing, BIC LLC, because I can, BWC, because we can. I mean, it's just really hard to come up with names, right? So we would name them strange acronyms. But the process of going about formulating those companies and the interactions with those companies and the owners and the way that those companies interact with each other, not just in a tax sense, but also in an organizational sense, was critical to my professional learning and to where I am today. So take every advantage and opportunity you can to understand how businesses work fundamentally. And I think that you're getting that in the classes that you're taking right now. As you put all those component pieces together, you understand how a business should run and all of the things that you do. So my career path, again, if I could make a recommendation to you, it would be to set a clear goal in terms of what your expectations for yourself are, and how those expectations will dictate where you are and what kind of work you'll seek. Because if you're successful, it doesn't matter per se the environment that you're in, you're going to succeed. What you want to do is make sure that that environment that you're pursuing or that job that you're pursuing leads you to, in the end, where you want to be. So, a lot of people don't like to hear this, but the reality is that I wanted to stay in Cache Valley or closer to Cache Valley. And subsequently, I made a lot of decisions that at the time may have seemed like they were compromises in terms of my professional career. But the end goal for me was always to be able to build something on my own and stay in an area that I love. And the best way I can recommend to you doing that is to get a phenomenal education and go out into the world and experience many different things. And that's what I love about the Huntsman School of Business, is the opportunities that you have to immerse yourself in different cultures and in different experiences throughout the world, because that experience will allow you to broaden your horizons in terms of the ability to interact with people of different backgrounds and different beliefs, and it will make your life and your professional career that much richer. So even though it all brought me back to the nucleus in this area where I wanted to be, those experiences are something I wouldn't trade for anything, and I travel frequently throughout the world still because it's a very refreshing thing for me to interact with people from different places, who have different ideas and different experiences than I do. So the other thing is obviously to work hard at what you do. And when I say work hard, I'll give you an example. I was talking to a friend the other day, and he went to work at the time for a Big Six firm in Dallas. And he actually replaced me as the CFO of a company when he moved back here, and I moved on. And he indicated to me, as we were talking about work schedules. And during the tax season, he said one day he walked down to go to work, and his son was laying by the door. And he said, and he woke him up. It was like 5 or 6 in the morning, and he said, "What are you doing, Blake?" And he said, "Dad, I just wanted to see you. I haven't seen you for 11 days." So tug at your heartstrings kind of thing. But the reality is in my experience, is that those are the efforts and the sacrifices you may be required to make. And you shouldn't make them begrudgingly, because they benefit you, they benefit your family, and you'll come to love the experiences that you're having. But the expectation of work, in my mind, is something that sometimes we fall down on, because occasionally there may be a mindset of specific work time frames, right? And I'll tell you that most of the people in my experience that will come to talk to you here at some point in their career spent substantial hours in terms of 7 days a week, minimum 8 or 10 hours a day for 5 or 10 years. In order to, just like your college experience, it takes, you guys are up night and day, going to class, participating in coursework, doing group projects, studying, you may be working, and all of that is not a 9-to-5 experience for most of you, I suspect. So, be willing and able and love to work, because it'll make a huge difference in your life, in my experience. The other thing that I really appreciate about the Huntsman School of Business are their pillars, or the central themes that we talk about here, and ethics is one that is close to my heart, because in accounting, obviously we've had some pretty interesting events over the last decade or 15 years that took us from the Big Six to the Big Four. And some of you are familiar with those, some of you may not be, but a lot of those were centered around ethics. And I guarantee you that you will come into contact, if not occasionally, maybe frequently, with situations that require you to understand what your ethics really are and what your fiduciary responsibility may be to shareholders or to employees or to owners of the company, as well as to yourself and your family. So a strong core, a strong center of ethical behavior and ethical leadership, I think, is critical to today's business successes. No matter how much money you make, if you did it in a way that compromised your values or was unfair or dishonest, I guarantee you it's not worth it. It will not buy you maybe what you think you're going to get. And I think you can see that repeatedly in business. People maybe compromise what they would have at other times known to have been something they wouldn't engage in because of peer pressure, right? Because of their boss or because of their manager or someone that they work for, or because of the thought that they want to get ahead. And John Huntsman wrote the book, Winners Never Cheat, and I think all of you have read that. I think it's been required reading, and it's definitely the case in terms of your experience in the workplace. Your reputation is the most important thing that you have going for you. And people will either brand you as ethical or someone that you cannot, that is difficult to work with, that you always want an attorney sitting next to you when you're talking to them, and you don't want to be one of those people. The flip side of that is that success breeds controversy. There's no question about it. And I think so your resolution needs to be strong and who you are and what your governing principles are, what it is that you do and what it is your company is all about, because there's no question that competitors or people who see your success are going to have, at times, are going to want to tear that down or to bring it into question. And I think that you can find any company that's successful, you'll find detractors to that company. Anybody that's successful, you'll find detractors to that person. And success definitely creates those situations where people are going to make controversy about what's going on. So those core principles of ethics will drive you through those controversial times, and those times will come. So as a brief example, and forgive me if I'm a little too personal, I have a son who's a senior in high school, who's obviously, like you were, looking to go to colleges, and he plays football, and ironically he plays for a team that has not had a very winning season this year or last year. And it has been a challenge for him as an individual. And I remember specifically talking with him 3 or 4 years ago as he set very specific goals as he began to speak with recruiters. Some of you know him. He's 6'4", 225. He's a bigger kid, and football's kind of been his thing for the last 15 years, I guess. I don't know, a long time. And so he had very specific goals as he began to speak to recruiters about what his performance needed to be and at what level he needed to be playing in order for him to be able to go to the next level. And of course nowadays in the NC2A they have academic requirements as well, and so that was the number one component for him, was to be successful in school, and the number two was for him to be able to play varsity football as a sophomore, a sophomore, a junior, and a senior. And as his team continued to lose, it was interesting to watch as he occasionally would become discouraged. But we talked about his need to be able to perform within that environment, which seems maybe contradictory, because especially in football where it's a team sport, you win and lose together, and I believe that. But Ethan has been able to carve out a niche. He's been an all-state player. This will be his third year as an all-state player for Utah, and despite the fact that he's with a team that has a losing record. And that's because as he set those goals, he was clear in his mind about what they would be. And he was also able to perform his position and his job every play, every series, every game, and his, to relative perfection in the sense that he was recognized as an all-state player, which was another thing that he needed to have, he felt, in order to go to the next level. So you may occasionally be in situations where you don't feel like you're on the winning team for whatever reason. In very successful organizations, there are always opportunities, and I use that word intentionally, opportunities for failure. And the other thing that I would say that I've learned through my professional career is that you should not be afraid of failure. It definitely will come. It will come in different ways, and it will come in manners that you can't expect or anticipate. And your ability to work through those, again, because of your principle-centered behavior in terms of ethics and leadership, you'll be able to get through those. And from failure comes great change and great success, in my experience. So in real estate, we always say that the number one most important thing that we say is who we say no to, not what we say yes to. Because there's a million deals, there's a million transactions to be done. And real estate, as we all know, can be very volatile, unlike the stock market. So the sophistication that we use in terms of our analysis for real estate transactions has significantly increased and improved based on the performance of our past acquisitions. So the experience that we've garnered through the transactions that we've made have made us better real estate investors. And arguably, I don't think that we would have been able to do that had we not gone through the portfolio of acquisitions and dispositions that we've had. We've been fortunate not to have any real estate failures, but in a market where properties are losing 50 and 60% of their value, and you see real estate companies that once were very successful private and public real estate companies fail. We've been blessed to succeed, and what that's bred for us has been a substantial opportunity in terms of acquisition of assets from other firms that have failed. And that only came because of our ability to diligently move through. So when everyone was acquiring, we were pressed substantially to increase our portfolio size. And we had a hard time justifying acquisitions based on the fact that, from our historic perspective, real estate was substantially overvalued. And because of that, we went through a 7 or 8 or 9 year period where we actually made very few acquisitions. There were years when we actually made 0 acquisitions. And people were critical of us for that. Bankers were critical of us for that. Investors were critical of us for that. And ironically now we look like rock stars, right? Because now we're buying 50 properties a year and paying great cap rates. So don't be dependent on what others are saying about you too much, as you don't want to compromise what you've learned on your path to success. And it really is a journey in my experience. You want to be able to, not so much, I spoke about goals and the importance of getting to where you want to be, but the process of getting there should be rewarding to you. It should be rewarding to you. I wanted to read you a brief quote that I wrote down from a guy that I like. And this is what he says: "You'll come to see that a man learns nothing from winning. The act of losing, however, can elicit great wisdom, not the least of which is how much more enjoyable it is to win. It is inevitable to lose now and again. The trick is not to make a habit of it." And I firmly believe that. I went to lunch yesterday with a friend of mine, and we spoke about a situation where a person is to be appointed to a position of importance in the community. And his position in terms of receiving applications for that position. And the criteria that they use for that position. And he was talking about an applicant who I know who currently, in my opinion, is a very successful businessman, but who has had some pretty pronounced failures in the past, one specifically. And we were talking about the fact that based on the criteria that the community uses, he will be essentially outside of the box in terms of being able to be appointed to this position because of a failure. And we talked about that, and I think that the expectation is nowadays that there will be no failure, right? That you'll never get below an A, that you'll never be in a situation where you have a bad paper or a bad exam or a bad interaction with anyone. And I think that that's unrealistic. And what we talked about was the fact that if that's the kind of applicant that they're looking for, they may not be getting the best applicants because people who have no failures typically have not ventured much, is my experience. And so we talked about the conundrum that is because we want to have extremely well qualified people in this position, and it's an appointed applicant position, but we can't get some of them because of past failures that maybe they've had. And I firmly believe in the economic principle of risk and return. And a lot of people will talk about spreading your risk, mitigating your risk, hedging your risk. Most successful entrepreneurs that I know will talk about putting all your eggs in one basket. Putting all your eggs in one basket until you make that big haul. And then you want to diversify your risk to try and keep it a little bit, right? But you cannot expect that if you're not willing to risk pretty much everything that you have, don't expect that the return will be high. And I think that you can look at it in terms of school, what's going on here. It's a big investment for you. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of money. I don't think it's a gamble, I think it is an investment. But you could be out doing other things, right? So you're taking the opportunity cost of what you may be able to do right now for what you think you will be able to do in the future with the skills that you're learning here. And I think that that's a great investment. And it's a huge investment of time and commitment from you. Work will be the same thing. If you give a 9-to-5 effort 5 days a week, I think that you will expect that type of return. And I'm not criticizing that. I think that for a lot of people, that's a very good return. I'm to that point in my life where I don't want to work 90 hours a week anymore. And I don't. So my income has dropped. And you know, for the 15 years that I did work that way, it got me to where I wanted to be today. So that's kind of my long, circuitous route to where I ended up. But there was a little thread through all of that, which were my expectations and my goals of where I wanted to be. Did I meet all of those goals and all of those expectations? There's no way. But because those expectations and those goals changed through my trajectory of where I went. But I will tell you that you want to be able to be giving more rather than less. And someone spoke about that in terms of Jeff speaking last time. And that really is the richness that will come from your professional career, is the ability to give back. And however little or however much that may be, take the advantage of the opportunity to do that throughout your career, as would be my suggestion. John Huntsman makes no bones about the fact that, and I think it's his family members that have said this as many times as he has, is that all throughout his life he was giving. It wasn't until he made a lot of money and he just decided to start giving it away. He started very early on. He started very early on, systematically trying to make a difference by helping other people that he was able to help in whatever way possible. If you look around yourself, I guarantee you'll find people that can benefit from your skills, from your time, from your efforts, whatever it may be. It may be fellow students, it may be people that you work with, it may be people in your community or your neighborhood, or you may have the opportunity to get involved with programs like we've done here at Utah State that take you international, and you can help people in that way. So don't wait to start giving back. I think that now is a great time to develop the giving muscle, I guess is what we'd call it, because it really is something that you have to develop, a desire to give back and to help other people. And that's what's brought me back to Utah State. Not that I know everything, or not that I have everything, or am able to give tons, but the opportunity to work and give back, I think you'll find, as it does for me, it will actually invigorate you more. It'll be much more rewarding than what you've actually given. And so, you know, take time to do that. Those are all my prepared remarks. I don't know if you guys have any questions, or if you want me to loosen my tie and tell you how the real world really is. Yeah.
What were some important factors that helped you realize it'd be wise to, I guess, reduce your exposure to the market, the housing market?
So, you know, we weren't in single family, or we're in multifamily commercial. And ironically, I think it was just our backward experience in terms of acquisition. So we had acquired a number of properties over time that we'd also disposed of because maybe we'd paid too much for, or our expectation in terms of what that property may be worth in terms of income and return wasn't what we thought it would be. And so we were willing to unload those properties when they didn't work out. And that gave us a lot of insight and a lot of understanding as to, over time, what we would be willing to pay for a property. In real estate, leverage is a key thing. And so a lot of people will lever up heavy. And we have a much lower leverage ratio for a number of reasons, not the least of which is to be able to weather the inevitable real estate downturns that will come in the business cycle. And so we have less leverage per property, and we have more equity, which allows us to get through those difficult times. So all of those may be counterintuitive to traditional real estate investors who want to lever up. But if you look at very successful long-term real estate investment companies, most of them will be that way as well. Their leverage ratios are actually a little less, and they don't distribute everything because they realize that a property at some point is going to require additional investment. So for us, it was the act of actually looking and saying, what is our actual asset? And for us, it's the ground. It's not maybe the building that's on the ground. The building on the ground will generate some revenue for us, but the building is a depreciable asset. And depreciation in real estate is a very real thing, in the sense that if you do not put money back into a property and you attempt to sell that, you're going to get a pretty major discount in the market for deferred rehabilitation or deferred maintenance. And so, from a time value of money sense, a lot of people will analyze that and say, well, it's better for us to just bleed all of the cash out of this property, right? Because we don't care what happens to it in the end. We'll have gotten all of our money back. We have a much longer term perspective, and we have our inventory is such that we age it in a way that when it hits a particular age, we're pretty much looking to sell that property and trade or build into a newer property. Because the point of diminishing returns for us based on our equity and leverage. So it's a very disciplined approach that we take. And it's all from experience from our previous acquisitions and dispositions, as well as other people that we've worked with in the marketplace. It's a long answer. Yeah?
Kind of relating to what you said about holding to your morals throughout your career. Was it hard to do that when you were seeing other firms make really good returns because of the bubble?
Well, so given the stance that we're private, it wasn't as difficult, but it was difficult because of, most of us were saying, well, man, maybe we should be doing what they're doing. And maybe maybe the paradigm really has shifted, And so, it challenged us. The biggest challenge we had is the fact that we had lenders coming and saying, hey, we want to give you tons of money, right? You guys have a great track record and you're great operators. We want to give you tons of money. And when people want to give you money, it's kind of hard to say no sometimes, right? So, like I said, it's important what you say no to. And so, because we didn't take that money, ironically now, it's a very concentrated world in terms of lenders and people that they're willing to lend to. And a very concentrated world in terms of firms that are left over that weren't, eaten alive through the real estate downturn. And so, again, we have people that are wanting to give us money, right? So we're in the same boat. We need to be careful about what we acquire. There's a perception that real estate right now is a great buy when cap rates are actually really low right now again. So we're in the same environment we find ourselves again. Yep. Did you have a question now?
I did, yeah. You talked about the common thread going throughout that story you told about your life being your expectations and goals and how those adjusted over time. How was that process of aligning those goals with your family's goals and kind of working that process out?
Yeah, good question. So I'll share two insights with you. My boys, I have two boys and a girl, and my girl is the youngest. And my two boys always say, we wish that the daughter had been born first. And I'm like, well, why do you feel that way? And they said, because you were a terrible parent until she was born. Which I think is probably true. Have a girl first, right? No. But it's not so much with a family. I think you have to understand that it's not just my expectations and goals; it's theirs as well. Okay, so I may want to hang out with them all the time, but that's probably not the best thing for me to do, frankly. Depending on what your situation may be, one or both spouses may or may not work. It just depends. And my experience with children is that you can set expectations high just like you do with yourself and the people you work with and employees and partners, and they'll usually live up to that. So I never really felt like it was a disadvantage to not be there when they were doing certain things, because I felt like I was oftentimes investing in their future as well. So I think you have to be realistic about the fact that if you expect as a parent to be around a lot, that you are not going to be working in a business that requires 80 or 90 hours a week. And that is a very conscientious decision that some may have to make. The flip side of that is my personal experience is my kids would prefer that I'm gone. So, it hasn't been hard. It hasn't been hard. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Okay, Ken, thanks.
Some of the students may not be aware that you're a living hero.
Yeah. You want me to tell you that story?
Why don't you I'm somewhat familiar with the story, but maybe they aren't. So maybe you should share what it's like to drive down the canyon and come across an accident.
Yeah, well, I'll share two things with you, and the first one will actually be the aftermath. So I have a friend, and because of what happened, we all were asked to go and be on the Ellen DeGeneres show, right? And so for those of you who really know me, you'll know that I'm not a very public person, all right? So I did not want to go, and basically they twisted my arm and I went. So I have a friend who's the first district court judge here in town. Where's his niece? He says, Blake, whenever I'm having a bad day and I feel like things just aren't going my way, I put in that Ellen DeGeneres video and I watch you look, and I watch how stupid you were on national TV. And it makes my day brighter.
What are friends for?
What are friends for, right? So that was my experience on national television. But right place, right time, I think really is what happened. We were staying at our cabin over the holiday. My son wanted to go skiing. It was New Year's Eve day, I believe, and we meandered down from Bear Lake. I took him to Beaver Mountain, and was just coming down the canyon, and happened upon a wreck just maybe a minute after it had occurred. And it turned out that it was actually a friend of mine who was a graduate here from Utah State University, and some of you may know Roger Anderson. Roger's younger brother Paul was one of my closest friends growing up, and so I saw Roger in the water. He was all wet. I didn't realize at the time he had been the driver. The car had flipped over. I jumped into the water about the time they shot the window out. For some of you may be familiar with what happened. And so they shot the back window out, and we got 2 of the kids out, and one was into actually a child seat, right? And so we couldn't get him out, couldn't pull him through the back window, and so we had to turn the car over. And I'll be honest, I was on the front bumper, and I remember thinking, this is never going to work. It's never going to work. And boom, we flipped it over. It was extraordinary. The car flipped up onto its side. The water started draining out. We flipped it back up onto its wheels, and they busted out the back window and cut the kid out. And I think he was legitimately maybe expired, but they resuscitated him, and we took them all down to the hospital, and everybody lived. It was a great experience. It was good to help neighbors and friends. I'll tell you, everyone says, well, was it cold? Because, you jumped in the Logan River on essentially December 31st. And I was up to about here in water. And no, it wasn't cold until about 2 hours later when I was sitting at home. And all of a sudden, the adrenaline must have dissipated because I started shaking, And so, yeah, right place, right time. I think anyone would have done the same. Thanks, guys.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, some of our students often wonder about, because we push international stuff so much, that maybe they're like you and they made a conscious decision that they want to be here for whatever reason. And I know you've been able to work around the world. So how do you do that while living in North Logan? Can you do that living in North Logan?
Yeah, you can. There's no question about it. That probably drove a lot of why I wanted to be here, Dave, because I knew that I would be going other places. So I would share a quick story with you. I have a business that we're involved in now that we actually acquired a couple of years ago. It was a small internet property, and it was kind of being neglected and ignored. And so we started to try to source a product, and we ended up going to China, and I actually went with the MBAs and traveled to China and ran into your neighbor DT and some of his friends, both Utah State graduates, Craig Morris and Nate Bradshaw. Some of you may know those guys. They work for us. And what turned out to be a company that was doing about $250,000 a year in sales was a very small company. We ended up actually acquiring a company in China. And now we're actually going the other way. We're sending stuff from the United States to China. And in 2013, we'll probably do about $7.5 million in sales. The projection for 60 months is, pushing 45, 50 million. And that happened just because I was willing to take advantage of an opportunity to travel with students to China. And I was struck by what I saw there. And I would say that is the experience that I consistently have when I travel internationally. Is just the sheer number of opportunities that there are in so many other places, and the advantage that we have now in a digital world to be able to work across the globe from essentially anywhere. And the only disadvantage to Logan is you have to drive an hour and a half to catch a plane. So, my passion for international work and international development started as a child because my dad was in the military. Like I say, I lived in a lot of different places. I loved it. And then when I was a student here, I worked full-time. I worked for a guy named Win Walker in irrigation engineering. And at the time, they were doing huge international contracts all across the world. And that's where I cut my teeth on international development. Which drew me to, it was where I met Chris Fossen and Morris Whitaker. Chris is the one who introduced me to the Seed Project. And Ken and Doug and Dave have been gracious to allow us to take a broader role in the Seed Project here at Utah State. And the people that we have on that board, of which Dave is one, and Ken is a vital part of our relationship, are phenomenal people who also have a commitment to international development. And so, a very similar, Dave, to my desire to live close to Cache County was a passion to be involved in international development. And so I think what you'll find, especially as you go to work for corporations of substance, that you will have a lot of opportunities to both work internationally and to volunteer. Most companies, whether it's big accounting firms, big law firms, big engineering firms, big Wall Street banks, want you to be involved in those kind of projects and those kind of things. So that was one of those little threads, very literally. I knew I wanted to be involved with that, and so I made every effort to make it happen. Does that help?
Do the students know that you are one of the moving forces behind Wasatch Social Ventures?
I don't know if moving forces is the right word, but yeah, no, so, you know, through a lot of efforts from so many in the College of Business, we created an independent 501c3 organization called Wasatch Social Ventures, which partners through a memorandum of understanding with the Huntsman School of Business to jointly administer the Small Enterprise and Education Development Project. And some of you have been on those trips, right? And so, you know, I mean, the evolution of that business, in my mind, is just extraordinary. It started, you know, with the vision of a number here on campus, and they made a partnership with a phenomenal group in Peru called Dan Pear, which is a large corporation. And you know, to look at it from the first year I went to the last year I went, I mean, the change and the growth is phenomenal. And we look at it and we see a lot of challenges and opportunities, and we're anxious to see that happen. And so, you know, we have at our organization now 3.5 FTEs, not counting myself, that work on this project. We're tied at the hip with Utah State and sending student interns out. Dave has been...
There's a bunch of students right now involved with fundraising projects to
Yeah.
give money to the fund that you started.
Bring it on. So, you know, yeah, Dave Herman's classes and some other teachers. You know, Dave Patel is helping us to re-engineer the experience of the interns in the field. There's no question that when you go into a new culture and immerse yourself that way, that it's a great experience. We want it to continue to be a learning experience for you in terms of giving you a competitive advantage in the marketplace as you go to graduate school or you go out to get a job with a company. You can talk about your experiences of educating, mentoring, and working in a nonprofit organization affiliated with the school. So, you know, every semester, I'd say, Dave, it's just, I mean, it's like growing 100% in terms of improvement. Not that it was in a bad place before, it's just such a great business, and it's been, I don't know any other word to say than cool. I love it. I absolutely love it. So, go on an internship. Thanks, guys.